Chapter 1, A silent echo in the void. The spaceship Kronos drifted through the cold expanse of deep space, its trajectory precise, yet eerie in the quiet that enveloped it. Inside, Captain Alden Grace sat rigidly in his seat, his eyes trained on the console that displayed the faint glow of a distant celestial body. Beside him, the alien ambassador, Rivak, stood tall, their slender fingers tracing the edges of a glowing orb, their eyes, a shade of violet not seen among humans, staring intently at the object in front of them. The orb pulsed gently in Rivak's hands, illuminating their bluish skin and the ridges along their skull. Alden was still uneasy around Rivak. It wasn't just the alien's appearance that unsettled him, it was what they were about to do. "You're sure this will work?" Alden asked, his voice low, barely rising above the hum of the ship's systems. Rivak turned their gaze toward the captain, the light from the orb reflecting in their eyes. "It must. If we fail, there will be no second chance. Not for your species. Not for mine." Alden exhaled slowly. They had been briefed about the importance of this mission, saving their worlds from an impending catastrophe. The luminary orb in Rivak's hand was not just a relic, it was their last hope to stop the spreading cosmic anomaly that threatened to devour both Earth and Rivak's homeworld. Yuriax.as. The Kronos continued its approach toward the anomaly. Alden glanced toward the back of the ship. In a chamber lined with metallic walls, Lieutenant Sarah Devereaux, their navigator, lay unconscious in a cryostasis pod. She had been injured during the initial mission to recover the orb, and now her life hung in the balance, just like the rest of humanity. Chapter 2, The unraveling past. The crew of the Kronos had been sent on a mission of peace to Yuriax 5 months ago, when Earth first detected the growing black tear in space. The anomaly had been pulling stars into its endless void, collapsing planets and solar systems into nothingness. Earth, desperate to survive, reached out to its neighboring star systems for help. Yuriax had responded, sending Rivak, one of their most learned scholars, as an ambassador to Earth. Rivak had come with a solution: retrieve the luminary orb, a lost artifact from their ancient civilization, and use its energy to seal the tear. The problem? The orb was hidden on a dead moon, one that orbited a forbidden planet known as Ishonara. Getting the orb had cost the crew dearly. 2 of their fellow crew members, engineers David Malone and Hannah Wells, were lost during the extraction. The moon was crawling with hostile creatures, remnants of Ishonara's long-dead inhabitants, who seemed drawn to the orb's power. Alden still remembered the screams as Hannah was dragged into the shadows, her helmet visor cracking open, her final words a desperate plea for rescue. David had tried to save her but was torn apart moments later by the same creatures. They hadn't stood a chance. Alden had blamed himself for the losses, and so had Sarah. She had grown distant after that, and now, lying in the cryopod, he feared he might lose her too. Chapter 3, The Shadows of Ishonara. The orb had a price. Alden could feel it. He watched as Rivak handled it with a reverence bordering on fear. The Yuriaxian had told them that the orb wasn't just a weapon or a tool, it was a living entity, with its own desires and needs. If mishandled, it could turn on them, accelerating the collapse of the universe. But there was something Rivak hadn't told them, something Alden could sense. Why had Yuriax abandoned the orb on Ishonara? Why had they feared using it again, even in the face of the cosmic tear? Rivak finally spoke, breaking the silence. "The luminary is not like anything you have encountered before. Its energy comes from the essence of life, from the stars themselves. It is ancient, older than Yuriax, older than Earth. But it is unpredictable." Alden's heart sank. "Unpredictable? What do you mean?" "The orb chooses its path. We can guide it, but it will decide how to act. If it senses hesitation or fear, it may amplify the chaos." Alden tightened his grip on the controls. They were flying into the mouth of destruction with a sentient, volatile relic as their only hope. "And if we fail? Then everything we know will be swallowed by the void," Rivak answered calmly. Chapter 4, Into the Tear. The Kronos reached the edge of the anomaly, the massive black rift in space shimmering like a monstrous eye, pulling everything around it into its maw. The ship's systems began to glitch, the lights flickering, and alarms blaring as the gravitational forces grew stronger. Alden activated the stabilizers, trying to keep the ship from being dragged in too fast. "Rivik, we're running out of time." Rivik nodded and brought the orb to the center of the control room. As they placed it on the pedestal designed for it, the orb flared to life, emitting a radiant, pulsing energy. The walls of the ship trembled as the orb's light grew brighter, filling every corner of the room with an intense, almost unbearable glow. "Focus," Rivik whispered. "The orb is listening." Alden clenched his fists, feeling the pull of the void tugging at his mind, filling it with dark thoughts. He saw flashes of his dead crew members, heard their cries, felt their pain. The orb was testing them, pushing them to the brink of their sanity, but Rivik stood firm, their face serene as they began to chant in a language Alden didn't understand. The orb responded to the chant, its light shifting, twisting into spirals of color that shot out into space, weaving a bridge of energy across the expanse between the Chronos and the anomaly. The ship lurched violently as the orb sent a pulse of energy directly into the heart of the anomaly. For a moment, Alden thought it was working. The rift seemed to slow its expansion, the darkness within it growing quieter, but then the orb flared again, brighter this time, and Alden felt a surge of fear. Something was wrong. Chapter 5, The Betrayal of Lytrivik's chant faltered. They stumbled back from the orb, their face pale, eyes wide with shock. "No, it's resisting." Alden rushed to their side. "What do you mean? What's happening?" "The orb, it is rejecting the tear. It does not want to close it." "Why the hell not?" Alden demanded, his voice rising in panic. Rivik stared at the orb, their voice trembling. "The luminary feeds on energy, chaos, destruction. The tear is too rich, too powerful. It desires more, not less." Alden's mind raced. They had come all this way, sacrificed so much, only to learn that their savior, the orb, was now the greatest threat. "How do we stop it?" Rivik didn't answer. Instead, they moved closer to the orb, their hands trembling as they reached for it again. I must speak to it, convince it." But Alden wasn't so sure. The orb's light had changed, it was darker now, more menacing, casting long shadows across the room. He could feel it, the pull of its hunger, the weight of its desire to consume everything in its path. Rivik closed their eyes and began to chant again, but this time, there was desperation in their voice, a plea for mercy, and then, without warning, the orb's light surged, engulfing the room. Alden was thrown back, slamming into the console, his vision blurring from the impact. When he looked up, Rivik was gone. Chapter 6, A flicker of hope. Alden's breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled to his feet. The orb still floated in the center of the room, but its light was dimmer now, pulsing weakly. "Rivik," he called out, but there was no answer. The alien was gone, consumed by the very object they had worshipped. The ship's alarms were blaring now, warning of imminent failure. The anomaly was growing again, pulling the Chronos toward its center. Alden knew they had only moments left, but then, a faint voice echoed through the room. "Captain." It was Sarah. Her voice was weak, but she was awake. Alden rushed to her cryopod, his hands trembling as he activated the release. The lid hissed open, and Sarah sat up, her face pale but alive. "What happened?" she asked, her voice groggy. "No time to explain," Alden replied, helping her out of the pod. "We need to stop the orb before it destroys everything." Together, they moved toward the orb. Alden could feel its energy waning, but it was still dangerous. "We need to overload it," he said, his mind racing. "If we can push it past its limit, maybe we can destroy it." "But how?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with fear. Alden glanced at the ship's reactor, an idea forming in his mind. "We use the ship's power core. If we can channel its energy into the orb, it might be enough to overload it." Sarah nodded, her hands already moving to the console. "I'll set it up. But once we start, there's no going back." "I know," Alden replied, his voice steady. "Do it." Chapter 7. The final gambit. The ship's systems groaned as Sarah diverted all power to the reactor. The lights flickered, and the hum of the engines grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the ship. Alden stood before the orb, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel its power, the dark energy swirling within it, threatening to consume them all. But he wouldn't let it win. Not now. Not after everything they had lost. Now. Sarah shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the reactor. Alden slammed his hand down on the console, activating the power surge. The ship's energy shot through the wires, coursing into the orb with a blinding flash of light. For a moment, everything was silent, and then, the orb exploded. The shockwave rippled through the ship, sending Alden and Sarah tumbling to the floor. The lights flickered and died, leaving them in darkness, but outside, the anomaly was gone. Chapter 8. A new dawn. When Alden finally opened his eyes, the ship was quiet. The hum of the engines had stopped, and the lights were dim, but they were alive. Sarah groaned beside him, slowly sitting up. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Alden glanced out the viewport. The stars were still there, twinkling in the distance. The black tear that had threatened to consume them was gone. "Yeah," he said, his voice soft. "It worked. They had lost so much, friends, allies, even Rivik, but in the end, they had stopped the destruction. The cost had been high, but humanity would survive. As Alden sat there, staring out into the vast expanse of space, he couldn't help but wonder what would come next. The universe was still full of dangers, full of unknowns. But for now, they had a chance, and that was enough. Chapter 9. Echoes of the past. The Chronos drifted in silence for what felt like hours. Alden and Sarah sat in the dimly lit control room, catching their breath after the ordeal. The anomaly was gone, and for the first time in months, Alden felt a sense of relief wash over him. Yet, something nagged at him, a whisper in the back of his mind, a lingering question he couldn't shake. Where had Rivik gone? "Are you sure it's over?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice still fragile from her time in cryostasis. Alden turned to her, exhaustion visible in his eyes. "The tear is gone, but..." He paused, searching for the right words. "There's something I don't understand. Rivik, they didn't just disappear. The orb consumed them." Sarah frowned. "The orb's destroyed. Whatever was inside of it, its power, is gone too, right?" "Maybe," Alden said slowly. "But the orb was alive, sentient. It wasn't just some ancient technology, it was more than that. And Rivik, they knew more than they told us. What if the orb wasn't just an artifact? What if it was part of something larger? Something that's still out there?" The thought lingered between them, heavy and foreboding. Sarah stood and moved to the ship's console, trying to activate the ship's remaining systems. "We'll need to check the logs," she said, her voice firm. "There has to be some record of what happened before the orb exploded." As she worked, Alden paced the room, replaying the events in his mind. The orb's power, Rivik's cryptic warnings, and their sudden disappearance, it all pointed to something bigger, something they weren't seeing yet. Moments later, Sarah's console beeped, and the ship's logs appeared on the screen. "Got it," she said, her voice tight with anticipation. "These are the readings from the moment the orb was activated until now." Alden stepped beside her, peering at the data. "What are we looking at?" "Energy spikes," Sarah replied, scrolling through the logs. "Just before the orb's explosion, there was a massive surge of power, more than the ship's reactor could generate. And look at this." She zoomed in on a specific part of the data. There was another source of energy, external. It wasn't coming from the orb or the ship. Alden's eyes narrowed. Something else was feeding into the orb. From where? Sarah pointed to a cluster of coordinates on the screen. "Right here. Whatever it was, it's in this sector of space. And it's still out there." The realization hit Alden like a wave. The orb hadn't been acting alone. It had been part of a larger system, one that had only been disrupted by the explosion. But the source, the true power behind the orb, was still somewhere out there in the vastness of space. "We're not done," Alden said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "We need to find it." Chapter 10, The search begins. Repairing the Chronos after the battle with the orb had been a monumental task. With Sarah's help, Alden managed to get the ship's critical systems back online, enough to get them moving again. But supplies were low, and communication with Earth was still impossible. They were alone. "Do you think Earth is okay?" Sarah asked one evening as they sat in the galley, sharing the last of their rations. Alden stared into his cup of water, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. "I hope so. If the tear is gone, that means the immediate threat is over. But we won't know for sure until we make contact." Sarah nodded, though her expression was far from hopeful. "And Rivik? What do you think happened to them?" Alden didn't have an answer. Rivik had sacrificed themselves, either intentionally or not, to the orb. But whether they were truly gone or had been absorbed into something greater, something unknown, was still a mystery. "We'll find out," he said eventually. "Once we track down that energy source, we'll know." Chapter 11, The Black Station. The coordinates led them to a distant sector of space, far from any known colonies or star systems. The area was devoid of planets or stars, just an empty void that stretched on for light years in every direction. But then they saw it. A massive, dark structure loomed in the distance, its edges sharp and angular, like a fortress built in the middle of nowhere. It didn't appear on any star charts, and its design was unlike anything Alden had ever seen. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. Alden's hands tightened around the controls as they approached the structure. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's the source of that energy." The orb was connected to this place. The Chronos docked at the station, its systems automatically syncing with the alien technology. The airlock hissed open, and Alden and Sarah stepped out into a cold, sterile corridor, the walls lined with strange, glowing symbols. "Stay close," Alden muttered, gripping his plasma pistol tightly. Sarah followed closely behind, her scanner in hand, monitoring for any signs of life. The station was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of energy that seemed to pulse through the walls. As they moved deeper into the structure, they began to notice signs of activity, footprints in the dust, discarded tools, and equipment left in a hurry. "They were here," Sarah said quietly. "Recently." Alden nodded, his senses on high alert. Whoever had built this place had left in a hurry, but why? And more importantly, who were they? The corridor led to a large chamber, its walls lined with what looked like containment pods. Inside the pods were humanoid figures, suspended in some kind of stasis. Some of the figures were Euriaxian, like Rivik, but others were different. "These aren't just Euriaxians," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "These are from different species. And some look human." Alden's heart raced as he approached one of the pods. Inside was a figure, pale and emaciated, but unmistakably human. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "Humans, out here." Before Sarah could respond, the chamber shuddered, and the doors behind them slammed shut. A deep, resonating voice filled the air, speaking in a language neither of them understood. Alden spun around, his pistol raised. What the hell was that? The voice spoke again, but this time, it shifted, its tone becoming more familiar, more human. "Welcome, Captain Grace," the voice said, sending a chill down Alden's spine. "We've been expecting you." Chapter 12, The Forgotten. The room darkened as the voice echoed through the chamber. Alden scanned the area, searching for the source of the voice. "Show yourself," he shouted, his weapon ready. A figure stepped from the shadows, their movements slow and deliberate. Alden's breath caught in his throat when he recognized the face. It was Rivik, or rather, something resembling them. Their body had changed, their features now a grotesque mix of Euriaxian and human traits. Their eyes, once filled with wisdom, now glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. "Rivik?" Alden asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure smiled, but it wasn't Rivik's smile. I was Rivik, once. But now, I am something more. Something beyond what you or I could have imagined. Sarah took a step back, her scanner beeping wildly. This isn't right, Alden. The readings are off the charts. Whatever this is, it's not Rivik anymore. Alden's mind raced. He had known something was wrong from the moment they entered the station, but this was far beyond anything he could have predicted. What have you done? He asked, his voice laced with anger. Rivik, or the being that had once been Rivik, spread their arms wide. I have become part of the luminary. The orb was not a tool, but a gateway, an invitation to something greater. I have merged with its power, with the energies of the universe itself. And now, I offer you the same. Alden felt a wave of nausea wash over him. You're not Rivik anymore. You're something else. The being nodded slowly. I am the luminary's emissary now. And you, Captain Grace, are its next vessel. Before Alden could react, the chamber filled with light, and he felt a searing pain shoot through his body. The air around him crackled with energy, and for a brief moment, he saw everything, the tear in space, the destruction of entire worlds, the endless hunger of the luminary's power, and then, darkness. Chapter 13, the final stand. Alden awoke to a throbbing headache, his body aching from head to toe. He was back aboard the Kronos, lying in the med bay. Sarah was at his side, her face pale but determined. You're awake, she said softly. Alden groaned, sitting up slowly. What happened? We barely made it out, Sarah explained, her voice tight with emotion. The station collapsed after you blacked out. Whatever that thing was, it's gone. For now. Alden's mind raced as the memories flooded back. The being that had once been Rivik, the offer to become part of the luminary's power, it had all been too much. But he had survived. They both had, but at what cost? We need to warn Earth, Alden said, his voice hoarse. The luminary isn't gone. It's still out there, and it's looking for vessels. We have to stop it before it finds another host. Sarah nodded, her expression grim. I'll set a course for home. As the Kronos began its journey back to Earth, Alden stared out into the vast expanse of space, his thoughts heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. The battle wasn't over. Not yet, but they would be ready.